I'll never forget the day my world changed. It started like any other morning, sunlight slipping through the curtains, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the quiet hum of a new day. I had no idea that by sunset, everything I thought I knew about my life, my friends, and myself would be turned upside down. You know, people always say you should trust your gut. But what if your gut is telling you something you don't want to believe? What if the person you trust most is the one holding the knife behind your back? That morning, my phone buzzed with a message, just a simple notification, but it set off a chain of events I could never have imagined. I picked it up, expecting a good morning text from my best friend, Rachel. Instead, I saw a message from an unknown number. You don't know the truth about Rachel. Be careful. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of joke, a prank? I almost laughed it off, but something about the words about the timing made me pause. I tried to shake it off. I got ready for work, made my coffee, and told myself not to be paranoid. But the message lingered in the back of my mind. Like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. Rachel and I had been friends for years. We'd been through everything together: breaks, job changes, family drama. She was the one person I thought I could always count on. But as I drove to work that morning, I couldn't help but wonder, what if I was wrong? That day at the office, Rachel was her usual self, smiling, laughing, making plans for the weekend. But I noticed little things I'd never seen before. The way she glanced at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I tried to push the doubts away, but as the day went on, the feeling grew stronger. Something was off. Something was wrong. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled Rachel aside and asked her, point blank, if everything was okay. She looked at me, her eyes wide and innocent, and said, of course, why wouldn't it be? I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already starting to grow. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the day over and over in my mind. The message, the look in Rachel's eyes, the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the end. The first crack in the foundation of a friendship I thought would last forever. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. Before everything fell apart, Rachel and I were inseparable. If you saw one of us, you'd almost always see the other. We met in college, two nervous freshmen in a sea of strangers, and somehow, we just clicked. She was the bold one always, the first to try something new, always the one with a plan. I was quieter, more cautious, but with Rachel by my side, I felt braver than I ever had before. We shared everything: late-night study sessions, cheap pizza in our tiny dorm room, secrets whispered in the dark. When I got my first real job, Rachel was the first person I called. When her heart was broken for the first time, I was the one who held her while she cried. We promised each other that no matter what happened, we'd always have each other's backs. After college, we moved to the city together. We found a little apartment with creaky floors and a leaky faucet, but it was ours. We decorated it with thrift store finds and inside jokes. We built a life together, piece by piece, supporting each other through every twist and turn. Rachel was there for all my milestones. She cheered the loudest when I got promoted. She helped me move when I finally saved up for my own place. She was the one who convinced me to go on that first date with Mark, who would later become my husband. She even stood by my side as my maid of honor, beaming with pride as I walked down the aisle. Our friendship was the kind people envied. We finished each other's sentences, knew each other's coffee orders by heart, and could communicate with just a look. I trusted her with everything: me hopes, my fears, my future. But looking back, I wonder if I missed the signs. The little moments when Rachel seemed distant, or when her laughter sounded forced. The times she changed the subject when I talked about my successes, or the way she sometimes looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I brushed it off as stress, or jealousy, or just the normal ups and downs of friendship. I never imagined she could be hiding something from me. Not Rachel, not my best friend, but as I lay awake that night, replaying every memory, every conversation, I started to question everything. Had I been blind? Had I ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to see the truth? The next morning, I tried to act normal. I met Rachel for coffee, just like we always did. She was her usual self, coody, energetic, full of plans for the weekend, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I watched her closely, searching for any hint of the betrayal I was starting to fear. She asked about my job, my marriage, my family. She laughed at my jokes, teased me about my messy purse, and made plans for us to go shopping that Saturday. But underneath it all, I sensed a distance, a wall I hadn't noticed before. I wanted to ask her about the message. I wanted to demand the truth, but I was afraid of what I might hear, afraid of losing the one person who had always been there for me. So I kept quiet. I smiled, I laughed, I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was unraveling. That day, I realized how much I depended on Rachel, how much of my life was built around our friendship. The thought of losing her was almost too much to bear, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing faster than I could control. I started to notice things I'd never seen before, the way Rachel's stories didn't always add up, the way she seemed to know things about my life that I hadn't told her, the way she sometimes disappeared for hours, with no explanation. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And as the days passed, the distance between us grew. Our conversations felt forced, our laughter hollow. I started to wonder if I ever really knew Rachel at all. I didn't know it then, but the foundation of our friendship was already starting to crack, and soon, everything would come crashing down. It's strange how the smallest things can suddenly seem suspicious when you're looking for them. I started noticing details I'd always ignored, little inconsistencies, odd glances, moments that didn't quite fit. It was like a puzzle I'd never realized was missing pieces, and now I couldn't stop searching for where they went. The first real sign came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was leaving work early, the sky heavy and gray, when I decided to surprise Rachel at her office. We hadn't had lunch together in weeks, and I missed the easy comfort of our old routines. I picked up her favorite soup and headed downtown, feeling a little silly for being so sentimental. When I arrived, her desk was empty. Her coworker, Jenna, looked up and smiled. "Oh, Rachel just stepped out for a bit. She said she had a meeting across town." I frowned. Rachel hadn't mentioned any meetings. In fact, she'd told me she was swamped and wouldn't be able to leave her desk all day. I tried to brush it off. Maybe something had come up last minute. But as I walked back to my car, the soup cooling in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I called her. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She sighed dramatically. "Ugh, so boring. I barely left my desk. I'm exhausted." I hesitated. "You didn't have any meetings?" She paused, just for a second. "Nope, just emails and paperwork." "Why?" I forced a laugh. "Just curious. You sounded busy." It was a small lie, but it stuck with me. Why would she hide something so simple? What was she really doing that afternoon? After that, I started paying closer attention. I noticed how Rachel would sometimes change the subject when I talked about my job, especially after I got that big promotion. She'd smile and congratulate me. But there was something in her I saw, something sharp, almost resentful. I told myself I was imagining it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then there were the whispers. I started hearing things from mutual friends, little comments that didn't make sense. "Rachel said you were thinking of leaving your job. I heard you and Mark were having problems." None of it was true, but the rumors kept coming, always traced back to Rachel. One evening, I ran into an old friend from college, Sarah, at the grocery store. We chatted for a while, catching up on life. Then she leaned in, her voice low. "Hey, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything okay with you and Rachel? She's been saying some strange things lately." My heart pounded. "Like what?" Sarah hesitated. "Just that you're not happy, that you're struggling at work, that Mark's been distant." I didn't want to believe it, but she sounded so sure. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Why would Rachel say those things? Why would she paint me in such a negative light? That night, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every moment. I thought about the way Rachel had started spending more time with my other friends, inviting them out without me. I thought about the times she'd borrowed my things and never returned them, the way she'd laughed off my concerns. I started to wonder if Rachel was jealous. Maybe she resented my promotion, my marriage, my new apartment. Maybe she missed the days when it was just the two of us, struggling together. Or maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't see. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I'd ignored. The way Rachel sometimes made me feel small, the way she'd take credit for my ideas, the way she'd subtly undermine me in front of others. I'd always brushed it off as teasing, as just her way. But now, it felt different. It felt intentional. The final straw came one Friday night. I was hosting a small dinner, party, just a few close friends, some wine, and laughter. Rachel arrived late, as usual, but this time she brought someone with her, my coworker, Lisa. I was surprised that they barely knew each other, but Rachel acted like they were old friends, laughing and whispering together all night. At one point, I overheard Rachel telling Lisa about a mistake I'd made at work months ago, a mistake I'd confided in Rachel about, trusting her to keep it private. Lisa looked at me, eyebrows raised, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. After everyone left, I confronted Rachel. Why did you tell Lisa about that? That was private. She shrugged, her eyes cold. Relax. It's not a big deal. You're too sensitive. I stared at her, searching for the friend I thought I knew, but all I saw was someone I barely recognized. That night, I realized the truth. Rachel wasn't just a bad friend. She was actively trying to undermine me, to ruin my reputation, my relationships, my confidence. The betrayal stung deeper than I could have imagined. I felt angry, hurt, and most of all, how could someone I loved so much turn against me? How could I have missed the signs for so long? But even as the pain threatened to swallow me, a new feeling began to grow, a quiet, simmering resolve. I wasn't going to let Rachel destroy everything I'd built. I wasn't going to let her win. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to fight back. You never really know how much you trust someone until that trust is shattered. I always thought betrayal was something that happened to other people, something you read about in books or saw in movies. I never thought it would happen to me, and certainly not at the hands of my best friend. After that dinner party, things between Rachel and me changed. I tried to act normal, to pretend nothing had happened, but the air between us was thick with tension. Every conversation felt like a test, every word weighed down by suspicion. I started to pull back, keeping my distance, but Rachel seemed to sense it. She became even more involved in my life, texting constantly, showing up unannounced, asking questions that felt more like interrogations than friendly concern. Then, one Monday morning, everything came crashing down. I arrived at work to find my manager, Mr. Harris, waiting by my desk. He looked serious, almost grim. "Can I see you in my office for a moment?" he asked. My stomach dropped. I followed him, my mind racing through every possible mistake I could have made. Had I missed a deadline, forgotten an important email? Inside his office, he closed the door and gestured for me to sit. "I received some troubling information over the weekend," he began. "It's been brought to my attention that you may have shared confidential company details with someone outside the organization." I stared at him, stunned. "What? I would never." He held up a hand. "I'm not accusing you, but I need to know if there's any truth to it." We received an anonymous tip, and it included some very specific details about our upcoming project. Details only a handful of people knew. My mind reeled. I hadn't told anyone about the project except Rachel. I'd mentioned it in passing, trusting her as I always had. She'd ask questions, seemed genuinely interested, and I'd thought nothing of it. But now, sitting in that office, I realized how naive I'd been. I assured Mr. Harris that I hadn't shared anything confidential, and he seemed to believe me. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on me all day, their whispers following me down the hall. That evening, I called Rachel. My hands shook as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hey, what's up?" I took a deep breath. "Did you tell anyone about my work project?" There was a pause, just long enough to confirm my worst fears. Of course not. Why would I do that? I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But the evidence was piling up, and my heart knew the truth. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. The next day, things got worse. I received an email from HR, asking me to come in for a meeting. Someone had filed a formal complaint against me, accusing me of creating a hostile work environment. The complaint was anonymous, but the language was familiar, phrases I'd heard Rachel use before, stories only she would know. I felt like I was drowning. My reputation, my career, everything I'd worked so hard for was slipping through my fingers, and the person responsible was the one I'd trusted most. I tried to confront Rachel in person, but she avoided me. She stopped answering my calls, stopped responding to my texts. When I finally saw her at a mutual friend's birthday party, she acted like nothing was wrong, smiling, laughing, telling stories about our crazy adventures. But I could see the coldness in her eyes, the satisfaction in her smile. That night, I broke down. I cried harder than I had in years, the kind of tears that leave you empty and exhausted. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly alone. How could she do this to me? What had I ever done to deserve this? But as the days passed, my sadness began to turn to anger. I replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for answers. I realized that Rachel had been planting seeds for months, maybe even years. She'd been spreading rumors, undermining my confidence, isolating me from my friends. She'd been playing a long game, and I'd been too blind to see it. I started to see the pattern. Every time something good happened in my life, Rachel found a way to twist it, to make me doubt myself. Every time I confided in her, she used it against me. She wasn't just a bad friend, she was actively trying to ruin my life. The realization was like a slap in the face. I felt foolish, embarrassed, and angry at Rachel, but also at myself for letting it happen. But as I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Rachel win. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I'd built. She had broken my trust, but she hadn't broken me. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and started to plan my comeback. When trust is broken, it's not just your heart that shatters, it's your sense of self, your confidence, your faith in the world around you. In the days after Rachel's betrayal, I felt like I was living in a fog. Every morning, I woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream, but the reality was always waiting for me, heavy and cold. At work, the atmosphere had changed. People who used to greet me with smiles now looked away. Conversations stopped when I entered the break room. I could feel the judgment in their eyes, the suspicion in their voices. Even those who believed in me kept their distance, afraid to get caught in the crossfire. I'd always prided myself on my reputation, my work ethic, my relationships with my colleagues. Now, all of that felt tainted. I tried to keep my head down, to focus on my tasks, but the anxiety was relentless. Every email from HR made my stomach twist. Every meeting felt like a test I was destined to fail. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if maybe I really had done something wrong, if maybe I deserved this. Outside of work, things weren't much better. Our mutual friends were caught in the middle, unsure who to believe. Some reached out, offering awkward words of support, but most drifted away, unwilling to take sides. I understood, but it still hurt. The loneliness was suffocating. My husband tried to be supportive. He listened to me vent, held me when I cried, and told me over and over that none of this was my fault. But even he couldn't fully understand the depth of my pain. He hadn't known Rachel the way I had. He hadn't built a life around her friendship. I spent a lot of time alone in those weeks. I walked for hours, letting the city blur around me. I sat in coffee shops, staring out the window, replaying every moment, every conversation, searching for the point where it all went wrong. I wondered if I could have done something differently, if I could have saved our friendship, or at least protected myself from the fallout. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Rachel's betrayal wasn't about me. It was about her insecurities, her jealousy, her need to control. I was just collateral damage in her quest to feel powerful. That realization was both freeing and devastating. It meant I couldn't have stopped her, no matter what I did, but it also meant I could stop blaming myself. Slowly, I started to pick up the pieces. I reached out to the friends who had stuck by me, even if it was just a handful. I told them the truth, as calmly and honestly as I could. Some believed me right away, others needed time, but little by little, I started to rebuild my support system. At work, I met with HR and my manager, laying out my side of the story. I brought evidence, emails, messages, anything that could prove my innocence. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but eventually, the truth started to come out. The anonymous complaints stopped. The rumors faded. My reputation, though bruised, began to heal. But the biggest change was inside me. I realized I'd spent so much of my life trying to please others, trying to be the perfect friend, the perfect employee, the perfect wife. I'd ignored my own needs, my own boundaries, in the name of keeping the peace. Rachel's betrayal forced me to confront that part of myself, to ask hard questions about who I was and what I wanted. I started therapy, something I'd always thought was for other people. It was hard at first to admit how much I was hurting, hard to face the truth about my own patterns, but it was also healing. I learned to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner. I also learned to let go of the anger, the resentment, the need for revenge. I realized that holding on to those feelings only gave Rachel more power over me. If I wanted to move forward, I had to release them. It wasn't easy. Some days, the pain still felt fresh. Some nights, I still dreamed about the friendship we'd lost, but slowly, I started to feel like myself again, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. And as I looked at the pieces of my life, scattered but not destroyed, I realized something important. I could build something new, something better, something that belonged to me. Rachel had tried to ruin my life, but she hadn't succeeded. I was still here, I was still standing, and I was ready for what came next. There's a moment, after the shock and the heartbreak, when something inside you shifts. The pain doesn't go away, but it changes shape. It becomes fuel. It becomes resolve. That's what happened to me. I realized I could let Rachel's betrayal define me, or I could use it to become stronger than I'd ever been. I wasn't interested in petty payback or stooping to her level. I wanted something deeper, something that would restore my dignity, my confidence, and my sense of justice. I wanted to reclaim my story, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd ever been hurt by someone they trusted. The first step was to gather the truth. I started quietly, methodically, collecting every piece of evidence I could find. I went through old messages, emails, and social media posts. I looked for patterns, for proof of Rachel's lies and manipulation. It was painful, reliving those moments, but it was also empowering. For the first time, I saw the full picture: how she'd twisted my words, spread rumors, and played people against each other. I reached out to others who'd been caught in Rachel's web. Some were hesitant at first, afraid to get involved. But as I shared my story, they began to open up. I learned I wasn't the only one she'd hurt. There were others, former friends, colleagues, even family members who'd been burned by her need for control. We started to piece together a timeline, connecting the dots of her betrayals. With every new detail, my resolve grew. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who'd been silenced, everyone who'd been made to doubt themselves. But I knew I had to be smart. Rachel was clever, and she thrived on drama. If I confronted her hidden, she'd twist the story, play the victim, and turn people against me. I needed a plan that was calm, measured, and undeniable. So I started with my workplace. I scheduled a meeting with HR and my manager, this time coming prepared. I presented my evidences: screenshots of messages, records of conversations, and statements from others who'd experienced Rachel's manipulation. I spoke clearly and calmly, refusing to let emotion cloud my words. I explained how the anonymous complaints matched Rachel's language, how the rumors always started with her, how she'd tried to sabotage my reputation. It wasn't easy. There were moments when my voice shook, when the old pain threatened to overwhelm me. But I held my ground. I told the truth, and I let the facts speak for themselves. To my relief, they listened. They saw the pattern, the evidence, the truth. The investigation that followed was discreet but thorough. Rachel's influence began to unravel. The complaints against me were dismissed, and my reputation was slowly restored. People started to see Rachel for who she really was. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to our mutual friends, one by one. I didn't beg for their loyalty or try to turn them against Rachel. I simply told my story, honestly and openly. I shared what I'd learned, what I'd experienced, and what I'd discovered about Rachel's pattern of behavior. Some were shocked, some were angry, some didn't want to believe it. But the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. I also took time to rebuild myself. I focused on my work, my marriage, my passions. I started volunteering, helping others who'd been through similar betrayals. I poured my energy into things that made me feel strong and alive. I refused to let Rachel's actions define my future. And slowly, I began to see the change. The people who mattered most stood by me. My confidence returned, stronger than before. I learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, to value myself in a way I never had before. The final piece of my plan was the most difficult. I wrote Rachel a letter, not to attack her, not to beg for answers, but to release myself from her hold. I told her how much she'd hurt me, how deeply she'd betrayed my trust. I told her I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. I told her I was moving on, and that I hoped she would one day find the peace she was so desperately seeking. I never sent the letter. I didn't need to. Writing it was enough. It was my way of closing the chapter, of turning pain into power. Looking back, I realized that my revenge wasn't about destroying Rachel. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about refusing to be a victim, about standing up for the truth, about finding strength in the ashes of betrayal. Rachel tried to ruin my life, but in the end, she only made me stronger. And as I stood on the other side of the storm, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. There's a quiet power in taking your life back. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single, dramatic moment, but a series of small, determined steps. That's how my comeback began, it with a shout, but with a steady, unwavering resolve. The first thing I did was reclaim my space. I cleared out the reminders of Rachel from my home, old photos, gifts, little notes she'd left over the years. It was harder than I expected. Each item carried a memory, a piece of the friendship I thought we had. But as I packed them away, I felt lighter, as if I was making room for something new. At work, I walked a little taller. The investigation had cleared my name, but I knew some people still whispered behind my back. Instead of shrinking away, I faced them hidden. I greeted everyone with a smile, kept my focus on my projects, and let my work speak for itself. Slowly, the tension eased. My colleagues began to see me again as the subject of rumors, but as the person they'd always known. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during the chaos. I invited them out for coffee, reached out with honest messages, and apologized for my distance. Some friendships picked up right where they'd left off. Others needed time to heal. But I was patient. I knew trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. One of the most important steps in my comeback was learning to say no. For so long, I'd been a people pleaser, always putting others' needs before my own. Rachel had taken advantage of that, and I was determined not to let it happen again. I set boundaries with friends, with coworkers, even with family. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. I learned that saying no wasn't selfish, it was an act of self-respect. As the weeks passed, I found myself growing stronger. I started taking risks, again volunteering for new projects at work, signing up for a painting class, even planning a weekend getaway with Mark. Each new experience was a reminder that my life was still mine to shape. But my comeback wasn't just about moving forward, it was also about making things right. I knew there were people Rachel had hurt besides me, people who were still struggling with the fallout of her actions. I reached out to them, offering support, sharing my story, and encouraging them to stand up for themselves. Together, we formed a quiet alliance, a network of people who refused to be victims any longer. One day, I received a message from Jenna, Rachel's former coworker. She'd heard about what happened and wanted to talk. We met for coffee, and she shared her own story, how Rachel had spread rumors about her, sabotaged her projects, and tried to turn their boss against her. Listening to Jenna, I realized just how far Rachel's reach had extended, but I also saw the power of speaking out, of refusing to stay silent. With Jenna's help and the support of others Rachel had wronged, we decided to take action. We compiled our stories, our evidence, and presented it to Rachel's current employer. We didn't do it out of spite, but out of a sense of responsibility. We wanted to make sure no one else would be hurt the way we had. The response was swift. Rachel was called in for a meeting, and the truth finally came to light. She was held accountable for her actions, and for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about making sure the cycle of hurt ended with us. But the real victory wasn't in seeing Rachel face consequences. It was in seeing myself and others rise above the pain. We'd taken back our power, our voices, our lives. As my comeback gained momentum, I found myself smiling more, laughing more, feeling lighter than I had in years. I realized that Rachel's betrayal, as painful as it was, had given me a gift, the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. I started to dream again. I set new goals, made new plans, and allowed myself to hope. I wasn't the same person I'd been before the betrayal. I was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I knew what it meant to lose everything, gone to find myself again. And as I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I felt a sense of pride, not just for surviving, but for thriving, for turning pain into power and betrayal into a comeback no one saw coming. My story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. There's a moment in every story when the truth can no longer be hidden, when secrets unravel and masks fall away. For me, that moment came on a day that started out as ordinary as any other, but by the time the sun set, everything had changed. It began with a simple email. The subject line read, "Meeting request." It was from HR at Rachel's company. I felt my heart race as I opened it. reading the polite but firm invitation to join a video call later that week. Jenna and two others who had come forward were copied on the message. I knew this was the moment we'd all been waiting for, and the moment Rachel had never expected. The day of the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, hands trembling just a little. I took a deep breath, reminding myself how far I'd come. I wasn't the scared, broken person Rachel had tried to make me. I was here to speak the truth, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been hurt. The call began with introductions. The HR manager's voice was calm and professional, but I could sense the seriousness in her tone. We're here today to discuss some serious concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding workplace conduct and personal integrity. Rachel joined the call a few minutes later. Her face appeared on the screen, composed but pale. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of something, fear maybe, or regret, but she quickly masked it with her usual confidence. The HR manager began to lay out the evidence. She read statements, shared timelines, and presented the messages and emails we'd provided. One by one, Jenna and the others spoke, their voices steady but emotional. They described the rumors, the manipulation, the subtle ways Rachel had tried to undermine them. I listened, my heart pounding, as the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart. I told my story not with anger, but with honesty. I described how Rachel had been my closest friend, how I'd trusted her with my secrets, my dreams, my fears. I explained how she'd used that trust against me, spreading lies, sabotaging my work, and isolating me from others. I didn't sugarcoat the pain, but I also didn't let it define me. I spoke about the strength I'd found, the support I'd built, and the lessons I'd learned. Rachel tried to defend herself. She denied, deflected, and even tried to turn the blame back on us. But the evidence was overwhelming. The HR manager remained calm, asking pointed questions, refusing to let Rachel dodge the truth. For the first time, Rachel's confidence began to crack. Her voice wavered, her arguments grew weaker, and the mask she'd worn for so long finally slipped by the end of the meeting. The truth was undeniable. Rachel had betrayed not just me, but many others. She had created a web of lies so tangled that even she couldn't escape it. The HR manager thanked us for our courage and assured us that appropriate action would be taken. When the call ended, I sat in silence, letting the weight of it all settle over me. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The truth was out, but it didn't erase the pain. It didn't bring back the years of friendship I'd lost, or the trust that had been broken. But it did bring closure. It did bring justice. Word spread quickly. Rachel was suspended pending further investigation. People who had once doubted me reached out with apologies, some embarrassed, some ashamed. My reputation, once tarnished, was restored. But more importantly, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. I realized that the real victory wasn't in seeing Rachel face consequences. It was in reclaiming my own life, my own story. It was in knowing that I had stood up for myself, that I had refused to be silenced or broken. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about everything I'd been through: the betrayal, the loneliness, the fight to be heard. I thought about the people who had stood by me, and the strength I'd found within myself. The truth had come out, and with it, a new beginning. I wasn't the same person I'd been before. I was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I knew what it meant to lose everything and to find myself again. As I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool night air, I felt a sense of freedom. The past no longer held me captive. The future was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, deeply at peace. After the truth came out, life didn't magically return to the way it was before. There were still scars, some visible, some hidden deep inside. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of suspicion, the ache of betrayal, the constant second-guessing, all began to fade, replaced by something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Picking up the pieces wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness crept back in, when I missed the friendship I thought I had with Rachel. Sometimes, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text her about something funny or frustrating, only to remember that chapter was closed. Grief, I learned, isn't just for lost loved ones, it's for lost trust, lost innocence, lost versions of ourselves. But I also discovered something beautiful in the process. I found out who my real friends were: the ones who stood by me, who listened without judgment, who believed in me even when the world seemed to turn its back. Some friendships grew stronger, forged in the fire of adversity. Others faded away, and I learned to let them go without bitterness. At work, things slowly returned to normal. My reputation, once tarnished, was restored. Colleagues who had kept their distance began to include me again, and I found myself laughing in the break room, feeling like I belonged. I poured myself into my projects, not to prove anything to anyone, but because I wanted to. I rediscovered the joy in my work, the pride in my accomplishments. At home, Mark and I grew closer. He had seen me at my lowest, and instead of pulling away, he held me tighter. We talked more about everything and nothing. We took long walks, cooked new recipes, and made plans for the future. The storm had tested our marriage, but it had also made it stronger. I also kept in touch with Jenna and the others who had come forward. We became a small support group, checking in on each other, sharing victories and setbacks. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone, that others understood the pain and the healing. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. For a while, I doubted my instincts, questioned my judgment, wondered if I was to blame. But as I rebuilt my life, I realized that trusting the wrong person didn't make me weak, it made me human. What mattered was that I found the strength to stand up, to speak out, to start over. I began to fill my days with things that brought me peace. I read more, took up painting, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. Helping others reminded me that pain can be transformed into purpose, that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and care. There were still moments of sadness, of course. Healing isn't a straight line, but each day, the light grew a little brighter, the laughter a little easier, the future a little less frightening. Looking back, I realized that Rachel's betrayal, as devastating as it was, didn't define me. My response did. I chose to rise, to rebuild, to forgive Annette for her. But for myself, I picked up the pieces, one by one, and built something stronger, something truer, something entirely my own. And as I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons I'd learned, that trust is precious, that strength is quiet, and that even after the worst storms, it's possible to find hope again. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I never imagined I'd be the one sharing a tale of betrayal and comeback. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked for. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from all of this, it's that trust and strength are more connected than I ever realized. That trust is a fragile thing. We give it freely to the people we love, sometimes without a second thought. We build our lives around it, believing that those closest to us will protect it as fiercely as we do. But when trust is broken, it can feel like the world itself is crumbling. The pain is sharp, the confusion overwhelming. You question everything, your choices, your instincts, your worth. But here's what I learned. Being betrayed doesn't mean you're weak. It means you were brave enough to open your heart. It means you believed in the goodness of someone else, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. The real strength comes in what you do next. For a long time, I thought strength meant never letting anyone see me hurt. I thought it meant holding everything together, pretending I was fine, pushing through the pain alone. But true strength, I discovered, is something quieter. It's the courage to ask for help. It's the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit when you're struggling, to let others in. Strength is also about boundaries. It's about knowing when to walk away from people who don't value your trust. It's about standing up for yourself, even when your voice shakes. It's about forgiving, not to excuse what was done, but to free yourself from the weight of anger and resentment. I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and using it to grow. The scars remain, but they remind me of how far I've come. They remind me that I survived, that I rebuilt, that I found hope again. If you're listening to this and you've been betrayed, please know you're not alone. Your pain is real, and your feelings are valid, but you are stronger than you think. You have the power to pick up the pieces, to write a new chapter, to trust again, first in yourself, and then, when you're ready, in others. And if you're lucky enough to have people in your life who have earned your trust, cherish them, nurture those relationships. Be the kind of friend, partner, or family member you wish you'd had in your darkest moments. In the end, betrayal didn't break me. It revealed my strength. It taught me to value myself, to set boundaries, and to never settle for less than I deserve. So, hold your head high, trust yourself, and remember, even after the deepest hurt, it's possible to find hope, to find healing, and to find the strength to begin again.